The wagon stopped at the dusty edge of the ranch just before sunset, and the wind carried a strange silence across the empty fields. The young woman stepped down slowly, clutching her worn suitcase, while staring nervously at the endless land surrounding her. She had been told many things during the long journey west, but none of them felt comforting anymore. The men at the station had laughed quietly, whispering that she would be working the fields. Someone even said she would never see the inside of the ranch house again. Her heart pounded as she remembered those words echoing in her mind again and again. The prairie wind tugged at her dress, as if warning her that life here would not be easy. She wondered if she had made the worst decision of her entire life. The ranch buildings looked large and distant, like silent judges waiting to see her fail. Then the cowboy finally appeared near the barn doorway, watching her with calm, curious eyes. And in that moment, nobody knew his next words would change everything forever. The young woman walked carefully across the dirt yard, feeling every pair of eyes watching her uncertain steps. Ranch hands leaned against fences, whispering quietly, as though they already knew her fate. One of them muttered that brides who arrived alone usually lasted only weeks here. Another man laughed and said the fields would break her spirit before winter arrived. She pretended not to hear them, but each word felt heavier than the suitcase she carried. Her hands trembled slightly, yet she kept walking toward the tall cowboy waiting ahead. The sun sat low behind him, turning a shadow long across the ground. For a moment, she wondered if he looked disappointed by what he saw. She had expected kindness, but fear had prepared her for something very different. When she finally stood before him, the entire ranch seemed to fall completely silent. The cowboy studied her face quietly, noticing the exhaustion hiding behind her determined expression. Dust covered her boots, and the long journey had left tired lines across her face. Yet there was something else there too, something stronger than fear or doubt. The ranch hands waited eagerly, certain they already knew what would happen next. Everyone expected the same harsh instructions new brides usually received upon arrival here. The woman lowered her eyes, preparing herself for the words she dreaded hearing most. She thought he would point toward the fields and tell her where the work began tomorrow morning. The wind rattled the wooden barn doors behind him, as the moment stretched painfully longer. Then the cowboy finally spoke, and his voice carried across the entire quiet yard. What he said next made every man listening suddenly straighten in surprise, because his words were nothing like anyone had expected. He tipped his hat slightly, and spoke in a calm voice that carried quiet strength. He told her he knew exactly what the station men had probably said during her journey west. He knew they warned her she would be nothing more than another pair of hands working the fields. But then, he looked directly into her eyes, with a steady, respectful expression. He said something that made the ranch hands exchange confused glances immediately. The cowboy told her she would not be forced into any life she never chose. He explained that this ranch needed honesty more than it needed obedience. He said a person who works freely always works better than someone pushed by fear. The woman blinked in disbelief as his unexpected kindness settled over the yard. Then he finished his sentence with words nobody standing there would ever forget. He said quietly that here she could choose exactly who she wanted to become. For several seconds nobody spoke, because those words had completely changed the air. The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react to something so unusual. Most of them had never heard a ranch owner speak that way before. The woman slowly raised her eyes again, studying the cowboy's face carefully for any hint of a trick. But his expression remained calm, patient, and surprisingly sincere in the fading sunlight. She felt the tight knot of fear inside her chest loosen slightly for the first time. During the long train ride west, she had imagined endless hard labor without choice. She expected orders, not freedom, waiting at the end of her journey. Yet the man standing before her seemed to believe something very different about life. The prairie wind moved softly through the grass surrounding the ranch buildings. And for the first time since arriving, hope quietly stepped into her uncertain heart. The cowboy gestured toward the ranch house, standing warmly beyond the dusty yard. Light already glowed softly from the windows, as evening slowly approached the wide prairie. He told her the house had been empty for too long and needed new life. But he quickly added that the decision about her future would always remain hers alone. If she wanted to learn ranch work, the fields and horses were waiting. If she preferred helping inside the home, that was just as valuable to him. The ranch hands watched silently, realizing this moment carried more meaning than they first understood. The woman felt tears threaten behind her eyes, though she tried bravely to hide them. She had come west expecting hardship, loneliness, and commands she could never question. Instead, she was being offered something rare in that harsh frontier world. She was being offered a voice, a choice, and a new beginning. That evening the ranch seemed different, as though the prairie itself approved of what happened. The woman stepped onto the porch slowly, still unsure whether this kindness was truly real. Inside the house, everything felt quiet, simple, and strangely welcoming after the long journey. The cowboy carried her suitcase inside without another word, giving her space to breathe. Outside, the ranch hands finally began speaking again, still puzzled by what they witnessed earlier. Some of them had expected anger, orders, and another frightened bride sent to the fields. Instead, they saw something gentler unfold right before their eyes. The sunset painted the sky deep orange beyond the wide-open prairie horizon. The woman stood by the window watching the fading light across the land. For the first time, she imagined a future here that might actually belong to her. Days passed, and the ranch slowly began changing in quiet, unexpected ways. The woman spent mornings learning the rhythm of life around the property. Some days, she walked the fields beside the workers, learning how the land breathed. Other days, she organized the house, bringing warmth and order back into empty rooms. The cowboy never once demanded where she should spend her time or energy. Instead, he simply worked beside everyone else, leading more by example than authority. The ranch hands noticed that respect was slowly replacing their earlier doubts. They began greeting her kindly instead of whispering behind dusty fence posts. Even the horses seemed calmer when she walked through the barn each afternoon. The prairie wind still carried its lonely songs across the land. But now those sounds felt less like warnings and more like promises. One evening the woman stood beside the fence watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. The cowboy approached quietly, leaning against the wooden rail beside her. For a moment neither of them spoke, letting the peaceful silence settle naturally. Finally she asked him why he had given her such freedom that first day. Most men in this harsh frontier world believed control was the only way to run a ranch. The cowboy looked out across the wide prairie fields before answering thoughtfully. He explained that fear might build fences, but it never builds a home. A ranch filled with forced labor would never truly grow strong or loyal. But people who feel respected will always protect what they care about. The woman listened carefully, realizing those simple words carried powerful truth. In that moment she understood exactly why this ranch felt different from the others. As seasons slowly changed, the ranch flourished more than it had in years. Crops grew stronger, the barns filled with healthy animals, and laughter echoed more often. The woman became a steady presence guiding both the home and the ranch family. Ranch hands began bringing their worries and questions directly to her porch steps. She listened patiently, offering calm advice learned from both hardship and hope. The cowboy watched quietly, proud of the life forming around them day by day. Their partnership grew not from orders, but from shared trust and respect. Visitors passing through often noticed the unusual spirit surrounding the ranch. Something about the place felt warmer than the rough frontier world outside its fences. And it all began the moment someone was finally given the freedom to choose. So remember this story the next time someone tells you what your future must look like. Sometimes, the greatest change begins with one person brave enough to offer kindness. Out here in the Wild West, freedom was often harder to find than gold. Yet this ranch discovered that respect could grow stronger than fear ever could. If this story surprised you or made you think differently about the frontier world, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you would have chosen if you arrived at that ranch. And if you enjoy these Wild West stories filled with mystery, courage, and unexpected twists, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with others. Because the next tale from the frontier might be even more surprising than this one.